Hi everyone, it's Cameron and welcome back to my channel. What I want to do today is share with you a few recommendations for Halloween reads. So Halloween is just a few days away and I have a lot of books that I recommend for anyone who wants to read something seasonally appropriate for this spooky time of year. So let's get started. Okay, my first recommendation is kind of a no-brainer. But I have to highlight this gorgeous edition of Dracula by Bram Stoker. This one is illustrated by Edward Gorey, and I have to just gush about the gorgeous end papers here. Very gothic illustration, and there's these little bats printed on the sides of the pages. So cute. This was not an inexpensive edition of Dracula, but it was worth every penny to me. I think it's just so special. And of course, Dracula is a perfect book to read around Halloween. It's kind of the quintessential vampire novel. So that's my first recommendation. Then next, if you want something shorter, since there are only a few more days in the season, I would recommend to you maybe We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Honestly, any Shirley Jackson would be appropriate for Halloween. She's such a great spooky writer. The Haunting of Hill House is another obvious classic. But personally, I prefer We've Always Lived in the Castle. It's about two sisters and their uncle who live in a house kind of at the edge of a village, and they are quite isolated from the village because I don't want to give away too much of the story, but there was a mass murder in their past of the rest of their family. And basically the villagers suspect the eldest sister of having poisoned her parents and her aunt, and I think another sibling. And anyway, so half the family died from this poisoning. And so the story is revealed about what actually happened in the course of the novel, but it's quite atmospheric and spooky. In high school, if you, like me, had to read The Lottery and you enjoyed it, you would probably enjoy this book as well. It's really about the tendency of the villagers to kind of gang up on these people. So great Halloween read. And then next, you may not have time for all of this one. It's pretty long, but if you are still in a Victober mood, Victober being, of course, the BookTube community's month-long annual celebration of Victorian literature every October, I recommend to you The Woman in White. This is a very substantial Victorian doorstopper novel, but it's quite atmospheric and appropriate for Halloween. It's very spooky. It starts with a young man meeting a woman who's dressed all in white, obviously. She's kind of a ghost-like figure, wandering and lost and confused. And he has to unravel the mystery of who she is, what happened to her, how she came to be there. And this is just a tremendously gothic novel. You know, it's got all the gothic trademarks that you want. It's also quite political, but don't let that dissuade you. It, in my opinion, is quite a feminist novel for the Victorian era. It really has a lot to say about gender inequality and how vulnerable women were to predatory men. Wilkie Collins really wanted to highlight that through this book. So it's a great Halloween read. So, you know, you don't have to be that attentive to the politics to really enjoy this book. Highly recommended. Then if you want something kind of light and sweet for Halloween, but still falling within the themes of the season, I would recommend Thorny Hold by Mary Stewart. There's a lot of glare on this cover because it's got plastic on it. I got this copy at a secondhand bookshop, and I believe it must have been a library book prior to that, since it's got this plastic cover. But anyway, this is a love story, and it doesn't take place particularly at Halloween, but it is about a young woman who has witchy powers. So she inherits a house called Thorny Hold from her godmother, who was a witch. And she moves into the house and falls in love with it. But she kind of inherits also the reputation of her godmother, the witch. And it turns out that she actually does have some powers of her own. Maybe. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm not sure. It's really ultimately a very charming story about finding your place in the world and making a home for yourself. She starts out the story as a very lonely, sad little girl, and she ends up, with this lovely home, a lovely community, and there's just touches of magic sprinkled throughout. It's a really lovely, charming read. If you're not one for spooky, scary Halloween stories, but you do want to read something with a little bit of magic to it, Thorny Hold by Mary Stewart is a great choice. All right, next I have another classic, another must-read Victorian novel, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. No need to introduce this one really. It's just the iconic monster mad scientist story, more or less invented science fiction and more or less also invented that stock character of the mad scientist. So it's really a must if you enjoy Gothic fiction at all, or science fiction, really. And this edition in particular, I wanted to highlight because it has beautiful illustrations by Bernie Wrightson. I don't know how well these will show up on camera, but they are just stunning, amazing. This landscape or seascape, really. So yeah, you can't go wrong with Frankenstein. One of my favorite collections of creepy short stories is The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. In this incredibly beautiful 75th anniversary Penguin Classics Deluxe edition with, as you see, just this gorgeous spooky wolf door knocker. Here's the back. And then beautiful key and beautiful keyhole. This is a collection of retold fairy tales. So, for example, there's kind of a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, Puss in Boots, Bluebeard. That's the title story. The Bloody Chamber is a retelling of Bluebeard, extremely Halloween appropriate, right? If you're not familiar with Bluebeard, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but yeah, it's very dark. So her take is usually a bit feminist and also definitely leans into the darkness and the gothic and the magic. So I just think that these stories are so perfect for Halloween. I've almost forgot, there's one that is about a vampire. I don't know that that is a retelling of a fairy tale per se, but it certainly draws on traditional folklore. So, excellent read for Halloween. And then this collection of stories I read earlier this month, it's called Don't Look Now by Daphne du Maurier. This is a New York Review of Books Classics edition, and it's a selection of short stories that all have either a horror element or some kind of supernatural something going on. So there's ghost story, there's like a time travel story, but I really want to highlight two of the most famous short stories in here. The first one, Don't Look Now, is what they named the book after, is excellent for Halloween. It's so scary in my opinion. It's got such a dark twist at the end that you don't see coming. well, you kind of see it coming, but you know, you're still shocked when you get there. If you've seen the movie, which I want to say it's late 70s or early 80s, the actors are Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie. It's an amazing horror film. Really captures the atmosphere very well of the story. It's about a young couple who are on vacation in Venice, and they are trying to get over the loss of their little daughter who has recently died, and they are trying to kind of move past their grief and reconnect with one another. And so they're in Venice trying to have a good time, and some weird things start to happen to them. You know, they meet a psychic who tells them that their little girl is still with them, and they just strange circumstances just seem to keep popping up. And the father is our point of view character, the husband, and he keeps trying to approach everything as rationally as he possibly can and do what makes sense. And it just doesn't work. You know, over and over again, he keeps finding that the world doesn't conform to his expectations or his interpretations anymore. And I think it's really a profound story about grief, and how grief has just kind of broken all the rules for him, and how deeply disturbing that is. That sounds like it's just a really sad story instead of scary, but I promise you it is scary. And then the other story that I want to highlight in this collection is The Birds, which obviously everybody's familiar with Alfred Hitchcock's film version. I think the story is absolutely worth reading because it is quite different from the film version. And in fact, Daphne du Maurier did not care for Alfred Hitchcock's interpretation of the story. And I have to say that I do prefer the short story. So, you know, they're the same, only in the essential component of the story being birds decide to attack. But otherwise, it's very different. It's about a family living in an isolated cottage on the coast of Cornwall, and just struggling to keep these birds out of their house. I think Daphne du Maurier does such an incredible job with capturing the eeriness of birds. You know, something that seems so harmless and so innocent, turning vicious and scary. I'll read you just a quick passage from this because I think it'll show you what I mean about how she creates this eerie mood. He looked out to sea and watched the crested breakers combing green. They rose stiffly, curled, and broke again. And because it was ebb tide, the roar was distant, more remote, lacking the sound and thunder of the flood. Then he saw them, the gulls, out there riding the sea. What he had thought at first to be the white caps of the waves were gulls, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. They rose and fell in the trough of the sea, heads to the wind, like a mighty fleet at anchor, waiting on the tide. To eastward and to the west, the gulls were there. They stretched as far as his eye could reach in close formation, line upon line. Had the sea been still, they would have covered the bay like a white cloud, head to head, body packed to body. Only the east wind, whipping the sea to breakers, hid them from the shore. I just think that is so ominous. I mean, can you imagine looking out to sea and in the distance you see just hundreds of thousands of seagulls just sitting there waiting for something? I mean, absolutely terrifying, right? So then my last pick for you is one that I just finished reading myself, and that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This makes it look longer than it is. This is The Turn of the Screw and Other Short Fiction. The Turn of the Screw is only about 100 pages long, so you could read it in a weekend, and it is, I think, thoroughly creepy. It is about a young governess who is our main character, our point of view character. She's the narrator, and she's hired by a mysterious gentleman to go and teach and supervise his two young wards, I guess. They're his niece and nephew. And they're small children. And the only other character that we get to know is the housekeeper. And anyway, our young governess goes and she falls in love with the children. She loves them, but she starts to see apparitions. You know, first a man appears standing on the top of a tower in the manor house. And then she starts to see a young woman, and she eventually identifies, when she talks to the housekeeper about who she's seeing, she identifies them as servants who previously died. So the young man is the former valet, and the woman is the previous governess who died. And that's why she had to be replaced by our narrator. And she begins to have the sense that these two apparitions, these ghosts, are connected to the children somehow. You know, that they are influencing the children, that they have secret meetings with the children, that they're corrupting the children. And she just kind of becomes obsessed with this idea. And the story is extremely ambiguous about whether these ghosts are actually there or whether our governess is unraveling mentally. And are the children really being affected by these other presences, or are the children responding to the governess being hyper-vigilant and just very concerned about them? It's, like I said, very ambiguous. You know, you really have to just make up your own mind. And James never makes anything particularly clear. And, you know, that might annoy some people. I think it's pretty fun. But it's a great spooky read for Halloween either way, right? Whether it's ghosts or madness, one way or another, it's extremely gothic. So that's one that I also recommend to you. And again, it's a fairly quick read. Not an easy read, I would say. Like, Henry James's language is, in my opinion, kind of opaque at times. You know, it's a little hard to follow what he's saying. But if you're up for the challenge, The Turn of the Screw is an excellent read for Halloween. So that's it. Those are my recommendations. As you see, I love Gothic literature. I love Victorian literature. I love things that are a little spooky without going maybe all the way into like Stephen King level horror. I hope this list has given you some inspiration for a book you might pick up over this next week, or any time of the year that you are looking for something a little spooky to read. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful Halloween, and I will see you again soon.